most people able to achieve their goals? There could be many answers to this question, but at least one of those factors is undoubtedly self-control. In the late 1960s, Stanford researchers ran a series of experiments to see how children would cope with delayed gratification. This is when you choose to give up an instant reward for a greater future benefit. For example, avoiding that muffin now so you can look good on the beach, or choosing not to play with your friends so you can study for an upcoming exam. So going back to our Stanford experiment, a child, let's call him Timmy, was left alone in the room with one marshmallow. They told Timmy that if the marshmallow was still there when the researcher came back, he would get another marshmallow as a bonus. Double the reward just for waiting? Who wouldn't take up that deal? But then again, that's easier said than done. As you can imagine, little Timmy struggled with his inner demons, striving to triumph against temptation. His rational brain was telling him that waiting was the correct choice. At the end of the experiment, some children were able to resist the temptation, while others couldn't stop themselves from taking a bite of that sugary treat. Some cheeky kids even tried to eat small parts of the marshmallow with hopes of not getting caught. Several years passed and the researchers revisited these children to see how they were doing. As it turns out, the children who were able to wait longer were more likely to have better academic results, and their parents rated them as having higher tolerance for stress, ability to plan and reason, and exhibit self-control in frustrating situations. Many years later they went back to these same children, but now they were in their 40s. They were tested once more on their willpower and self-control. The results were in. Even after several decades, the people who showed strong self-control as children continued this trend well into their adulthood. Brain scans revealed those who were able to display self-control had more activity in the prefrontal cortex. In a previous video about willpower, I nicknamed this area the human brain. If you want to learn about getting better at delayed gratification, you might benefit from understanding more about willpower. You can click the link at the end of this video to find out more. Getting back on track, if you think about it, the results from this experiment makes perfect sense. If waiting gives a greater long-term benefit, then always choosing the option with the biggest payoff will eventually turn into what other people might call success. So next time, when you're faced with the soul-crushing decision of resisting that donut, or being tempted to procrastinate instead of studying, remember this video and the Stanford marshmallow experiment. Don't be like this guy. Lastly, I'd like to leave you with one final idea. If we expand the time frame of delayed gratification by a few years, one might argue that this is called an investment, i.e., giving up your ability to spend money now for a greater payoff in the future, albeit with a risk component due to the increased time frame. But then, is it a coincidence that the wealthiest people in the world all have financial investments, like stocks, bonds, or real estate? Comment your thoughts below.
Everyone's familiar with the story about Rachel Imenu. Yaakov comes and meets her, and it's love at first sight. The father-in-law of Yaakov wasn't the nicest guy. Actually, he tricked Yaakov many times, and of course, his greatest trick of all was to switch wives on him. Now, Yaakov and Rachel were aware of this idea that his future father-in-law might try to trick him, so they had signs that they would use to determine that it was in fact Rachel that he was marrying and not Leah. Now, on the night of the wedding, of course, Lavan comes to switch brides, and Rachel, instead of keeping quiet and using those signs to expose what's going on and then be able to marry Yaakov, she gives over the signs to Leah in order not to embarrass her sister Leah. This selfless act is a tremendous act, and it actually comes up later on in Jewish history when the Jewish people unfortunately were guilty of idol worship and were being destroyed and sent into exile. Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov, and Moshe all tried to come and save the Jewish people. None of them were able to. At the end, Rachel comes and says, I gave up my husband in order to not embarrass my sister, so if I could be selfless and give up all my desires and everything I hoped and wanted, so you can also overlook the fact that the Jews worshipped idols and forgive them. And her prayer was accepted. And Hashem says to her, you will be rewarded for your words and your tears that you cried for the Jewish people, and they will return to their land, and this is the promise that we will one day live happily ever after. Why was it that only her complaint to Hashem was able to arouse God's mercy, not the greatness of Moshe or Avraham, only hers? Later on in the story between Rachel and Leah, it comes up an interesting event that the Torah records. Reuven, the firstborn of Leah, goes out into the field and collects some dodaim, some type of flowers. Now, Rachel, who's at this point childless, sees her nephew, and she asks, Leah, can I please have some of those flowers? And in exchange, you can have Yaakov. So Leah's response is very, very surprising, confusing. She says to her, is it not enough you took my husband? You also want to take these flowers from me? And anyone following the story here is going to be like, what is going on? Take your husband? We all know that she gave her husband. So how can Leah come with such audacity and say to her, it's not enough you took my husband, now you want to take my flowers also? So what exactly did she do? Let's think about it. If Leah was aware that she was not wanted by Yaakov, she would have been very depressed. Who wants to be rejected? Who wants to be unwanted? So not only did Rachel give her the signs that would get her to keep Yaakov as a husband, but she figured out how to give her those signs without her realizing that she's not really wanted. The ultimate kindness and selfless act. This way, years later, Leah thinking that Yaakov married me, and then comes my little sister to sneak in and steal my husband away from me. The greatest koyach, the greatest power of her selflessness and her ability to just completely overpower her natural inclination for justice and vindication, she doesn't say a word, she stays quiet. And that's the ultimate greatness of Rachel, is at that moment, when she's confronted by Leah saying, it's not if you took my husband, but you want to take my flowers. She could have said, what are you talking about? I gave you your husband. All your children, your whole life is a gift from me. But the righteous Rachel did not think of giving it to her in her face like that. And with that koach, with that zchut, with that merit that she had, in that she stayed quiet at that moment, that's what she comes to Hashem saying, Hashem, creator of the world, stay quiet and forgive the Jewish people. And of course Hashem forgave us. Now, we can ask ourselves, she's Rachel Imenu. Of course she was able to do such a great thing. What about us? We're just regular people. But at the end of the day, every person in his life has that stage, that center stage. Hashem created each one of us, and we're given challenges, and it's our job to bring out the Rachel Imenu in us. As a matter of fact, the rabbis tell us that each person should say to himself, when will I reach the actions of my forefathers? And of course, the mothers. When will I be like them? It doesn't mean that you're going to be asked to do Akedas Yitzchak. You're not going to be asked to take your firstborn son after you waited 100 years and then ask to sacrifice him. But on your level, you're going to be asked to do your Akedat Yitzchak. You're going to be asked to do your tremendous selfless act like Rachel did. And when you had every right to say to this person that's fighting with you, saying, you took what's mine, when really you gave her what's yours, and you stay quiet. When we look at the opportunity in front of us as really ultimately a test from God, then we're able to look past that particular detail or the particular person in front of us. We're not asking everybody to be just a pushover and to be taken advantage of. But there are opportunities where we don't have to be so strict and so insistent on getting what's coming to us. Because you know what? At the end of the day, when we're so careful to ask for what's owed to us, so it says, Mida keneged Mida. When you all the time makpid, when you're all the time strict to get exactly what you're owed, and you never relinquish a little bit, so when you'll be judged later, they say that God will also be very demanding and demand each thing that you owe. But when you are ma'avir al midotav, when you let things go, when you forgive, and when you rise to the challenge and you pass those tests, so then Hashem will judge you in the same way. So let us all take a lesson to try to emulate the actions and the lives of our ancestors, not just to carry the names and to read the stories in a book, but to make it a living book, a living story, a living Torah, by emulating their ways.